Jack Marshall, a retired veteran, lived a quiet life in a small, peaceful neighborhood. He had spent most of his younger years serving his country. And now, in his retirement, he cherished the little things in life. Every morning, Jack could be seen sipping his coffee on the porch, greeting his neighbors with a warm smile and a friendly wave. Despite his calm demeanor, it was clear to anyone who knew him that Jack was a man of great strength and discipline. What made Jack stand out wasn't just his military past, it was his classic car, a stunning 1968 Dodge Charger. The car wasn't just a vehicle to Jack, it was a piece of his heart. His late wife, Emma, had loved that car. Together, they had spent countless weekends polishing it, taking long drives through the countryside, and talking about life. The car reminded Jack of all the beautiful memories he had shared with Emma, and he took care of it like it was a treasure. Every Saturday, Jack would roll out his toolbox and spend hours maintaining the car. He washed it until it gleamed in the sunlight, checked the engine to ensure everything was running perfectly, and even gave it a gentle pat when he was done. "You're still in great shape," he would say with a small smile, as if talking to an old friend. The neighborhood kids often stopped by to admire the car. "Wow, Mr. Marshall, this car looks like it belongs in a movie," one of them had said once, their eyes wide with wonder. Jack had laughed and let them take pictures. He enjoyed sharing the joy his car brought to others, especially the younger generation. But not everyone admired Jack's car. Recently, a group of teenagers had moved into the neighborhood. They were loud, reckless, and seemed to enjoy causing trouble. Unlike the respectful kids Jack was used to, these teens showed no interest in understanding the value of hard work or respect. Instead, they spent their time racing their noisy bikes through the streets and throwing loud parties late into the night. One day, as Jack was working on his car, the group walked by, laughing loudly. One of them smirked and said, "Nice antique, old man. Hope it doesn't fall apart on the road." Jack didn't respond. He simply kept working on his car, refusing to let their words bother him. But deep down, he felt uneasy. He could sense that these teens didn't share the same respect for others as the rest of the neighborhood did. Despite this, Jack tried to focus on the positive. He had good neighbors, a comfortable home, and the memories of a life well lived. To him, that was enough. But he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that trouble was brewing. Little did Jack know, his quiet life was about to be turned upside down. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack stood on his porch, looking at his car. "No matter what happens, I'll always protect what matters to me," he thought to himself. He didn't realize that those words would soon be put to the test. Jack's peaceful neighborhood was a place where everyone looked out for each other. Neighbors exchanged smiles, children played in their yards, and life moved at a calm, steady pace. But recently, the peace had been disturbed by a new group of teenagers who had moved into the area. Unlike the friendly, respectful kids Jack was used to, these teens were loud, careless, and seemed to thrive on drawing attention to themselves. This group was made up of 4 teens, all from wealthy families. They drove expensive cars and dressed in the latest fashions, but they didn't earn much respect from the community. They often threw loud parties that went on late into the night, leaving trash in the streets and blasting music so loud that even the most patient neighbors started to complain. They acted as though the rules didn't apply to them, brushing off any attempts to address their behavior. Jack had noticed them a few times while working on his car. The group often passed by his house, making snide comments or laughing at nothing in particular. One day, as Jack was wiping down the shiny hood of his Dodge Charger, the group walked by again. This time, one of the teens, a tall boy with a loud laugh, pointed at the car. "Hey, check out the museum piece," he said, loud enough for Jack to hear. His friends laughed, and another chimed in, "Careful, don't lean on it. It might crumble to dust." Jack paused for a moment but didn't look up. He had learned long ago not to let petty remarks get under his skin. Still, their laughter echoed down the street, and Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. He had spent years taking care of that car, pouring his heart into it, and now it was being mocked by kids who didn't seem to understand its value. The next day, Jack noticed something odd. The group had gathered at the park near his house, talking and laughing loudly as usual. But this time, they seemed to be pointing at his house and whispering to each other. Jack pretended not to notice, but he kept a close eye on them. He wasn't sure what they were planning, but his instincts told him it wasn't anything good. A few evenings later, as Jack was locking up his garage, he spotted the group walking down the street again. One of the girls in the group pulled out her phone and appeared to take a picture of his car. She laughed as she showed the screen to her friends, and they all smirked in his direction. Jack's stomach tightened. He didn't know what they were up to, but he knew it wasn't harmless fun. Despite the group's behavior, Jack decided to stay calm. He reminded himself that most of the neighborhood kids were polite and kind, and he wouldn't let the actions of a few ruin his peace. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. As the stars lit up the night sky, Jack sat on his porch, sipping his tea and gazing at his car. He didn't know what the future held, but he promised himself one thing. No matter what, he would protect what mattered to him. It was a quiet Friday evening when Jack decided to take his beloved 1968 Dodge Charger for a short drive. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with a soft breeze in the air. Jack had always found comfort in driving the car. It was his way of feeling close to Emma again, her laughter still echoing in his memories as he turned the key and heard the engine roar to life. He drove through the winding streets of the neighborhood, enjoying the calm. As he passed familiar houses, he waved to a few neighbors sitting on their porches. Everything felt normal, just like it always had. When Jack returned home, the sun had already set, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and orange. He parked the car in the driveway, taking a moment to admire its sleek lines under the dim porch light. Jack was looking forward to relaxing that evening. He locked up the car, grabbed his toolbox, and began his usual routine of cleaning up the garage. He liked the order of it, the peacefulness that came with small, everyday tasks. But tonight, something felt different. There was an odd stillness in the air, and the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. He shrugged it off and focused on finishing his work. Around 11 p.m., after he finally called it a night, Jack decided to head to bed. Just as he reached the hallway, a loud crash shattered the peace. His heart skipped a beat as the sound echoed through the house. It was unmistakable. Glass breaking. Jack's body went cold with fear as he rushed to the window. The sight that greeted him made his stomach turn. His car was under attack. A group of figures was gathered around it, moving quickly in the darkness. Jack's heart raced as he realized what was happening. His car, his precious car, was being vandalized. His first instinct was to run out there and confront them, but Jack knew better. He had lived long enough to understand that acting out of anger rarely ended well. Instead, he grabbed his phone and snapped a few pictures of the group in action, his hands shaking. The figures didn't seem to notice him, their focus solely on destroying what they couldn't understand. One of them, a tall boy with messy hair, took a large rock and threw it through the car's side window. The glass shattered, scattering across the driveway. Another teenager sprayed bright red paint all over the car's once pristine surface. Jack clenched his fists, but he didn't move. He couldn't let his emotions take over. As the teens continued to destroy the car, Jack's mind raced. Who were they? Why would they do something like this? He had always kept to himself, never bothered anyone. Yet here they were defiling something that meant the world to him. The group laughed loudly, unaware of Jack watching from the safety of his home. They seemed to enjoy the chaos they were causing. After a few more minutes, they quickly scattered into the night, leaving Jack standing in the doorway, his breath heavy in his chest. When the yard finally fell silent, Jack stepped outside, his heart sinking as he looked at the damage. The car he had taken such care of was now covered in scratches, broken glass, and red spray paint. He ran a hand through his hair, his emotions a mix of disbelief and anger. Jack stood there in the cold night, staring at the destruction. He felt the weight of the moment, but he knew this wasn't the end. He wouldn't let it be. The next morning, Jack could hardly bring himself to look outside. He had barely slept, his mind haunted by the image of his car, now destroyed. The quiet peace of his neighborhood, the kind of peace Jack had come to cherish, had been shattered in an instant. He stood at the kitchen window, staring at his Dodge Charger. It was hard to believe that such a beautiful, cherished piece of his life had been reduced to this. As he sipped his coffee, the quiet of the morning was broken by the sound of footsteps on his front porch. Jack turned to see his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walking toward him with a concerned expression on her face. "Jack, I saw what happened last night," she said softly, her voice filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Who would do something like that?" Jack shook his head, still feeling the sting of betrayal. "I don't know, Mrs. Thompson. I just can't understand it." Mrs. Thompson sighed, glancing at the car with a sad shake of her head. "That's just awful. You've always been such a kind neighbor. You don't deserve this." Other neighbors soon gathered, each expressing their concern. Mr. Davis, who lived 2 houses down, was the first to offer help. "If you need anything, Jack, just say the word," he said firmly, his voice full of anger. "We'll make sure this doesn't go unpunished." The entire neighborhood felt the shock of the incident. Jack had always been there to lend a hand, whether it was fixing a neighbor's broken lawnmower or helping someone carry groceries. He wasn't just a veteran, he was a friend, someone people could rely on. Now, as his car lay in ruins, the community rallied behind him, determined to support him in any way they could. But Jack refused to let their anger drive him. He didn't want a mob or revenge. All he wanted was for the teens responsible to face the consequences of their actions. "We'll figure this out," he told his neighbors calmly. "I don't need anyone to cause trouble. Let's just make sure we handle this the right way." The group of teenagers had been bold, leaving behind evidence of their actions. Jack had taken clear photos the night before, capturing their faces and the damage they had caused. Now, he would need to report it. He knew that involving the police was the right move, even if it meant dealing with the hassle. The neighbors continued to express their outrage, but Jack quietly thanked them. As he walked toward his garage, a feeling of determination settled in. He wasn't going to let this situation break him. His car might be damaged, but the memories it held would never be erased. The community's support meant everything to him. It reminded him that despite what had happened, he was not alone. People cared. People were watching. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt hopeful that justice would be served. That afternoon, he filed a police report. He explained what happened, showed the pictures he had taken, and gave a detailed description of the teens. He knew that it might take time, but he was willing to be patient. He wasn't fighting just for his car. He was fighting for what was right. As Jack sat at his kitchen table, waiting for the next steps, he looked out the window at the group of teens walking by, unaware of what was coming. For a moment, he let out a deep breath. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. Jack Marshall wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The days following the vandalism passed slowly for Jack. Every time he stepped outside, his eyes were drawn to the sight of his car, still sitting in the driveway, covered in scratches and red paint. It wasn't just the damage to the car that hurt. It was the feeling that someone had attacked something he held dear. The memories of his late wife, Emma, and their shared moments in that car made the pain even deeper. Still, Jack wasn't one to give up. He had lived through tough times before. His years in the military had taught him how to handle challenges, no matter how big or small. This wasn't just about a car. It was about standing up for what was right. He wasn't going to let these teens get away with it. Jack had already filed the police report. He had shared the photos he took the night of the incident, the images clear enough to identify the culprits. He thought that would be enough. But the days dragged on without any updates from the authorities. Frustration began to build inside him, but he refused to give in to it. He had to stay patient. The teens, meanwhile, seemed completely unfazed by what they had done. Jack saw them almost every day walking past his house, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. They acted as though there were no consequences for their actions. One afternoon, Jack overheard them talking near the park. "That old guy doesn't know what he's doing. Who's gonna stop us?" one of them said, snickering. Jack clenched his jaw, but he didn't say anything. He had learned that staying calm was the best way to handle situations like this. He would let the authorities deal with it. But the longer the police took to act, the more Jack realized something important. If he wanted to ensure justice was done, he couldn't just wait around. He had to take matters into his own hands. Carefully, of course. He wasn't about to break the law, but he knew he could push things in the right direction. So Jack reached out to a few local organizations. He contacted a group for veterans and shared his story, explaining how someone had attacked something that held deep meaning for him. The response was immediate. Jack wasn't just a veteran. He was a part of a community. And that community wasn't going to stand by while injustice happened. The story quickly made its way to local news outlets. A reporter visited Jack's home and interviewed him about the incident. The story spread, gaining traction across social media. People were outraged. How could someone vandalize the car of a veteran? The online support was overwhelming, with hundreds of messages from people offering their support and demanding that justice be served. The pressure on the police grew as the story spread. Within days, Jack received a call from the local authorities. They had located the group of teenagers and were now moving forward with an investigation. Jack couldn't believe it. Things were finally moving. Though he was relieved, Jack stayed calm. He had done his part. And now it was up to the police to handle the rest. But with the entire community backing him, he felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. Justice was in motion, and he was ready for whatever came next. Jack had always been a man who believed in doing things the right way, but as the weeks went by with no real progress on his case, he began to think outside the box. The teens who had vandalized his car seemed to be getting bolder, showing no signs of regret for their actions. It was clear that the initial shock of the community and the police hadn't been enough to deter them. Jack knew he needed to act. He spent the next few days carefully planning. He couldn't confront them directly. That would only make things worse. But he could set up a way to catch them in the act, ensuring there was no escape from the consequences. Jack's years of military training had taught him how to observe, how to stay hidden, and how to be patient. He would use all of that now. He started by installing new security cameras around his house. These were high-quality cameras, designed to capture clear images even in low light. Jack placed them in strategic spots around his driveway and the path where the teens often walked by. The cameras were discreet, hidden in plain sight. Jack didn't want to make it obvious that he was setting a trap, but he was certain it would be enough to catch anyone trying to do something suspicious. Once the cameras were in place, Jack began to wait. Each night after dinner, he would sit on his porch, pretending to enjoy his evening. But in reality, he was watching, waiting for any sign that the teens would return. He was patient, knowing that if he stayed calm and quiet, he would catch them eventually. It didn't take long. One evening, just a few days after the cameras were installed, Jack noticed the group of teens walking down the street. They were laughing and joking as usual, but this time, Jack saw something different in their behavior. They were slowing down as they approached his house, eyeing the car from a distance. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. They were planning something. He remained still, pretending not to notice, but his mind raced. He knew what they were thinking. They probably believed they could get away with it once again, that the community had forgotten about them, or that no one was paying attention anymore. The group stopped in front of Jack's driveway, and one of them, Jack recognized him as the tall boy with messy hair, pulled out a spray can. Jack's hand tightened around his coffee cup, but he didn't make a move. He was ready, and he knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. As the boy began to spray paint the car again, Jack quietly reached for his phone. He opened the security app and tapped on the live feed from the cameras. The images were crystal clear. The teens were caught in the act, and this time, there was no way for them to deny it. The boy finished spraying, and the group started to walk away, laughing among themselves. They had no idea that they had just sealed their own fate. Jack didn't waste a second. He called the police, providing them with the live footage from the cameras. He also sent them the video of the teens, clear as day, vandalizing the car. Within minutes, Jack heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police were on their way. This time, there would be no getting away with it. The sound of sirens grew louder, and Jack could feel a mix of relief and tension building inside him. He had done it. He had caught the teens red-handed with the help of his cameras, and now the police were on their way to handle the rest. Jack stood at his window, watching as the flashing lights illuminated the street. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had done everything in his power to see that justice was done, and it was finally going to happen. The police arrived quickly, pulling up in front of Jack's house. 2 officers stepped out of the car, and Jack greeted them as they walked toward him. He explained everything once again: the vandalism, the photos he had taken, and the video footage from the security cameras. The officers took careful notes, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of Jack's preparations. "This is solid evidence," one of the officers said, looking at the footage on Jack's phone. "We'll take it from here. Don't worry, sir. We'll make sure this is handled properly." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in days. The police were confident, and for the first time, Jack felt that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The community, the authorities, and even the media had rallied behind him. It wasn't just about a car. It was about holding people accountable for their actions. The next morning, Jack received a call from the police. They had found the group of teens. They were shocked when they saw the video evidence and couldn't deny what they had done. Jack had captured their faces clearly, and the proof was undeniable. The police informed Jack that the teens' parents had been contacted, and a meeting would be set up to discuss the consequences of their actions. Jack felt a mix of emotions. He had hoped for a swift resolution, but the reality of facing the parents of the teens who had hurt him was still difficult to imagine. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let this slide. The teens needed to learn a valuable lesson. A few days later, Jack sat in a small meeting room with the police officers and the parents of the teens. The parents, a group of well-dressed men and women, looked uncomfortable as they listened to the details of what their children had done. The teens, all seated in front of Jack, looked ashamed, but Jack could tell it wasn't genuine remorse. They had been caught, and now they had to face the music. One of the parents, a man with a stern face, stood up and spoke first. "We apologize for the behavior of our children," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "This is unacceptable, and we will make sure they pay for what they've done." The teens looked down at the floor, avoiding Jack's gaze. He could see that they understood the gravity of the situation, but he also knew that this moment was just the beginning of their lessons. The meeting ended with a clear set of consequences. The teens would have to pay for the damages to Jack's car, and they would be required to do community service. In addition, they would write a public apology for their actions. Jack felt a sense of satisfaction as the meeting concluded. Justice had been served, and the teens would have to face the consequences of their actions. As Jack left the meeting, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. His car would be repaired, but more importantly, the lesson had been learned. The community had stood by him, and in the end, justice had prevailed. Jack smiled to himself as he walked to his car, ready to move forward and leave the past behind. Weeks passed after the meeting, and Jack could finally breathe a little easier. His car, which had been a constant reminder of the hurt and frustration he'd felt, was now fully restored. The dents and scratches were gone, the windows replaced, and the red paint wiped away. It was as if the car had been given a second life, just like Jack. The teens who had vandalized his car had completed their community service. They spent hours cleaning up local parks, helping with neighborhood events, and even organizing a few charity drives. Jack didn't see them often, but when he did, they seemed different, more respectful, more aware of the impact their actions had on others. One afternoon, as Jack was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, he saw the group walking by again. This time, their heads weren't down in shame. They walked with their backs straight, no longer filled with arrogance or entitlement. As they passed by his house, the tall boy, the one who had thrown the rock through Jack's car window, looked at Jack. There was a pause, a brief moment of hesitation. Then he nodded. Jack nodded back, his face calm but resolute. The boy wasn't expecting the nod, but it was a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between them, of the lesson learned, and the respect earned. Jack knew that sometimes people needed a little push to realize what was important in life, and sometimes that push came through consequences. A few days later, Jack received a letter in the mail. It was from the group of teens. The letter was brief but sincere. In it, the teens apologized once again for what they had done, expressing how much they had learned from the experience. They wrote about how the community service had opened their eyes to the value of hard work and how they now understood the importance of respecting others. The letter ended with a promise. "We will never make the same mistake again." Jack read the letter quietly, his heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the car anymore. The lesson had been learned, not just by the teens, but by everyone in the neighborhood. People had come together to support Jack, and in the end, the entire community had grown stronger. The incident had shown everyone the importance of standing up for what was right. As Jack sat in his favorite chair on the porch, looking at his restored car, he thought about how far he had come. The road had been tough, but it had led to a deeper understanding of what it meant to live with integrity, to face challenges head-on, and to always push for what was fair. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Jack smiled to himself, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones that come in a big, dramatic moment, but the quiet ones that happen when you least expect it. This was his victory, his triumph, not over the teens, but over the darkness that had briefly clouded his peaceful life. Jack took another sip of his coffee, feeling at peace. The lesson had been taught, justice had been served, and life was moving on. The world was, once again, right.